times
Oh
without
no.
knowing, like the stream would just like stop and I'd have to restart it. And yeah,
I've had that so
I've,
many
I've
times. I've had like it just like blue screens like halfway through the stream, and people are just like, "Hey, what the hell?" It like stopped mid sentence. What's going on here? you know?
yeah, I've been through the whole gauntlet of like really weird problems that like yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad. I'm glad to have a fellow sympathizer with the Streamlabs OBS hell worlds that we find ourselves in.
Seriously, but it is free.
It is
I dig
free,
that.
so yeah, we can't complain. We can't complain too much. I think we might be live now, actually. Hey, we're
Yep,
live. Good
looks
stuff.
like we are.
How you doing, everybody in the
Okay,
chat?
cool.
I see a few familiar faces here. We got Martin Barakov, Saber, the Partisan, Jolie, Leonardo Grant. Harry's getting on. Good to see you, comrades. Today we're going to be talking about a very important subject, a very hot topic, contentious. People get very excited and sometimes upset about this.
Oh
It's
yeah.
about Settlers by Jay Sakai, and we're going to be talking with our dear comrade, young Simba. Simba, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hey, I am a person who has a lot of opinions on the internet. My name's Young Simba, and I have like half a YouTube channel, and mostly I just tweet a lot. My ad is Young Simba, and yeah, cool. Hey them.
Cool indeed. Well, people can find a link in the description box below as well to your channel and to your
Mhm.
Twitter, and you should. Simba is like low key like the fucking darling of the left. Like I remember.
Oh, stop.
Anytime somebody mentions like young Simba, they're just like, "Oh, young Simba, I fucking love them so much." Mexi did that actually. When Mexi was on the stream, I remember mentioning because we had this stream planned a couple, I think either a month or two ago, but then some things
Mhm.
came up. We weren't able to go ahead. We had to reschedule for today. But yeah, that was around the time Mexi came on, and like as soon as she heard like your name, she was just like, "Oh my god, young Simba! Oh."
Wow, okay, I didn't know that. She's really cool too.
Yeah, so you're
Awesome.
getting a lot of love from a lot of places.
Yeah, I've just gotta like actually hunker down and like make videos again.
Because I
Seriously.
remember you did a like a really there was like an introduction video, and I think you said that you were going to do a couple of videos on like the Black Panther Party and stuff like
Yep.
that. I'm not
Yep. Yep.
sure if that. I know you did. You did a number of great videos actually on settlers as well, which is going to be hugely useful, obviously for this
Mhm.
today. But should we expect the Black Panther Party videos to surface at some point, or
Yes, yeah, the first one is
yes?
gonna be on, the 10-point platform and program, and then after after that, like, it's not exactly the founding document. The 10-point platform and program is like, let me see, the party started in '66, I think it came out in '68, and, it just, like, very clearly says, like, "These are the things we wanna do. This is who
Mm,
we're here for," you know? I think the alternative title is literally "What We Want, what we believe,"
mm,
and, I see, especially, like, in documentaries and stuff, um, the view that we have of the Panthers is kind of distorted, and it's way less revolutionary, I think,
yeah.
than they actually were. So I just wanna do some myth busting, sort of.
Class. Well, I'm looking forward to that. I think it'll be very, very useful. Everybody, go ahead and subscribe to our comrades channel. You've got that to look forward to. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. But anyway, yeah, fantastic. Do you want to maybe tell people a little bit about your background? I know you've talked a little bit about the YouTube channel, maybe a little bit about your political development, sort of how you came to the left. I think it's usually a pretty nice way of maybe situating the conversations broadly. Obviously, just saying whatever you're comfortable saying. I mean, you don't need to, get too sectarian if you don't want to, or you can. I mean, by all means, if
Sure.
you want to complain about Trotskyists or whatever, we're always.
I like okay, I'm convinced that like Trotskyists are like some kind of myth. Like they're not real. I know I've never met a Trotskyist in my life. Actually, maybe one. Maybe I've met like one Trotskyist. I
Come to
just
Ireland. They're
yeah,
everywhere.
apparently in Ireland, like all of your parties are Trotskyist, aren't they?
Regrettably, all the big socialist parties are yeah, there. The Socialist Party, Socialist Workers Network, People for
Mhm.
Profit, Solidarity, yeah, Rise, yeah, the big ones are all Trotskyist.
Yep, yep. No hate to Trotskyists. Honestly, I'm
Shed
not
these
very
tears.
sectarian, much like yourself.
Yeah, no.
Um,
I'm taking the piss, but they're grand. There's they're fine. We disagree on some things, but it's not a big deal.
yeah, they're cool people, just, minor disagreements here or there.
Yeah,
But yeah, sure. So as a kid, I was really into history and philosophy, specifically Greek and Roman stuff. And I kind of noticed at some age, like maybe around 12, like we talk about the Revolutionary War, we talk about the Civil War here in America, but nobody says anything about like the Cold War. That was like the one that
Yeah.
we kind of like skipped over. We never went over that in the class. So I was like, Dad, what's the Cold War about? And he said, well, there was the Soviet Union and the space race and the blah blah blah. And at some point, he told me like, yeah, and they were like a socialist country. And I asked, what's socialism? So
Uh-oh.
for my 12th or my 13th birthday, I asked for a copy of the Communist Manifesto, and my dad got me one. so
That's
so
amazing.
yeah, that's that's how I got into Marxism, and then I didn't start taking it seriously up until like 2014 or 15, at which point I think that's when America got like very involved in Syria.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and there, I just started to notice like all these patterns in history, especially with America's imperialism. And at the time, I thought like maybe we just have like really stupid leaders that get us into like all of these terrible foreign wars.
Mm.
But I came to understanding that imperialism is a systemic issue that America just like has, and it's not gonna go away as long as the United States like exists in the form that it does right now. Um, so as of the current moment, I don't really put a label on myself, but most of my views line up with what you would probably call an anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist or
Based.
something like that. Yeah, yeah. And there are one or two
Class.
issues where I agree with Maoists, but I think I'm closer to anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism.
Mm.
Uh, yeah. So I'm sorry if that was long,
No,
but
that was great. Yeah, no, that's definitely a position I find myself drifting more and more towards as the as this year in particular has gone on, which I think a few people have
yeah.
noticed and pointed out actually a couple of times. Some people give you some shit about that actually as well. Like, hey Paul, what's going on? You were like really nice about such and such a country like 6 months ago, and now you're like, now you're like, I'm not
True.
really 100% sure if China is not doing a little bit of imperialism, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, well, yeah, there's a little bit going on there. So yeah. Anyway, it's a different conversation, but it is important that we
Sure,
we
sure.
do fight back against revisionism, because otherwise you're just going to end up finding yourself, especially you're if you're in America and there's like parties like the CPUSA and stuff like that, and and not to be like
Oh God,
attacking or anything
yeah.
like that, but if these parties are being blatantly kind of social democratic, you need to push back. You need to push back and
Yeah,
get back on the revolutionary path.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the same time though, I find it's kind of difficult to talk about China specifically because I don't like talking smack about countries that my country could potentially go to war with, like realistically, which is why
Yes.
after Soleimani was murdered, I think earlier this year, it's
Yeah.
like I don't like Iran. It's like, but I'm not going to talk smack about Iran has this law or that law and
Mm,
blah 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 and he deserved it or whatever because that just manufactures consent
that's right.
for imperialism, and we got to let people know that that type of thing is not okay. So I think publicly I'm a little bit softer towards China than I would be ideally.
Yeah.
I think that there's a time and a place to criticize this or that actually existing socialist country,
Mm, mm.
and you have to be aware of the effect that your words have on society at large.
That's such a good
So
take. Fucking badass. Absolutely love
appreciate
that.
it. I've
Thank you
got a
so much.
couple of those.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to these little
I've
bombs
got a
being dropped
couple good
throughout
ones.
the stream. Brilliant, thank you.
Yep, yep.
Before we get started any further, are you okay with taking a couple of questions from people in the chat as we go throughout this? Is that okay? We can kind of take things apart.
Yeah,
Is
definitely,
okay? Great. So,
definitely.
for people in the chat, if you want to participate in this, just write at Paul Marin. And then the question after that, then I'll know the question is directly for us to be addressed live on the stream here. So yeah, and if there's a lot of questions at once, I'll make a little notepad and we'll address them as they come up a little bit later in the stream. And yeah, but without any further ado, let's jump into it. Let's jump into the sort of into business,
Yep.
the meat of the stream, as they say. We're going to talk a little bit about settlers. Before we get started on this, I do want to read something. This is, again, I was talking about becoming a little bit more anti-revisionist, I suppose, as the time has gone on. But yeah, I do want to read this little quote out beforehand, because anytime we talk about settlers, there are so many people with extremely strong opinions about settlers, who haven't actually read the book, which, is a little bit, it's a little bit of a problem. You need to actually do your investigation. You need to do your work, and then if you're going to put forward your opinion, make sure that that's an informed opinion. So just to quote Mao here, and this comes from a Poe's book worship as well, so that might speak to another trend of people maybe who do sort of worship this text or other texts like it. You should oppose that as well. But of course, this text starts off with one: no investigation, no right to speak. Unless you have investigated a problem, you will be deprived of the right to speak on it. Isn't that too harsh? Not in the least. When you have not probed into a problem, into the present facts and its past history, and know nothing of its essentials, whatever you say about it will undoubtedly be nonsense. Talking nonsense solves no problems, as everybody knows. So, why is it unjust to deprive you of the right to speak? Quite a few comrades always keep their eyes shut and talk nonsense, and for a communist, that is disgraceful. How can a communist keep his eyes shut and talk nonsense? It won't do. It won't do. Mao has to say that twice, to really hammer that point home. You must investigate. You must not talk nonsense. No investigation, no right to speak. So, please, you want to have a good critique of this book? Read the book. Just read it. Actually, have a read of it of yourself. Don't just read like someone else's take on it or someone else's review or listen to someone you heard talking about it. Actually, read it for yourself and come to your own conclusions about these particular issues. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say straight up, and yeah, I think we can take it from there. So why have I had to say this? Why have I had to say this thing? Like first up, I mean, it almost seems kind of like aggressive, but the truth is, whenever you talk about this book, there's a lot of people who get very, very upset. So the first question I think that we should probably discuss is, why is it that so many, particularly white people in the United States, hate Settlers by Jay Sakai so much? Comrade Simba, what do you think?
I think that it's always kind of difficult. There's a book by the title of Why I Don't Talk to White People About Race Anymore, and it kind of goes through those same frustrations. Whenever you have a group of people who thinks of themselves like in a individualistic way, like, I'm Simba, you're Paul, or whatever, and then you and then you talk about what cultural category of privilege they have, like whiteness, and you talk about how whiteness is bad, then the individualistic part of a lot of people objects to that and is like, no, I wasn't a settler, like I didn't steal anybody's land, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, and that's like your ego talking. And a lot of people are working on trying to get better at that, but some people really just like don't. And they don't, and a lot of the time people don't realize that they're doing it, because probably because if I were to say something about white people and you were like an American white person rather than an Irish white person, it sounds like I'm talking about your personal character rather than your role in society, or what society how society benefits you in particular. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Also, Jay Sakai really doesn't pull any punches. Like, I think at one point he calls white people shock troopers in the first chapter, and that's not a good feeling. But Jay Sakai doesn't play nice.
No, he's pretty brutal. He's pretty brutal. Yeah, as you said, he doesn't fuck around. Like, he really he really goes for particularly for settlers and stuff like that. So it is kind of, I suppose, maybe a little bit of an attack, on people who fit into this category of settler colonizer. People get really upset about it. People get very upset about the title as well. People get really fucking upset about the title without actually reading the book. That's why I read out that Mao quote at the start. People get very upset about this title. I mean, what's the title there? Settlers: The Mythology of the White Proletariat. Yeah, I think it's something like that anyway. Right. And so this automatically sort of suggests that there is no white proletariat. I can actually see people in the chat right now who are like, the white proletariat exists. The white proletariat exists. And it's like, yeah, okay. Read chapter 4 of Settlers. I mean, he kind of says that it's the labor aristocracy. You know, that's not necessarily to say that it's not excluded from
Right.
being a part of the proletariat. I mean, if you've read Lenin, if you've read Imperialism, you'll know that the labor aristocracy is part of the proletariat. It's just a higher stratum of the proletariat. You know, it's almost like a subclass. You know, so that's why it is very very important. You know, to highlight that first and foremost, because a lot of these issues seem to be based around our understanding of the term class, of how we define and distinguish class and class boundaries and stuff like that. And to be honest, I don't know if Sakai does himself any favors in this in clarifying this point throughout the text, because he does kind of like Engels. Actually, Engels did this as well. You know, Engels would have talked about like a bourgeois proletariat and stuff like that. You know, I remember that's
Right.
really confusing for a lot of people. For everybody actually, a bourgeois proletariat. Are they proletarian? Are they bourgeoisie? Sakai talks a lot about people having people who are part of the proletariat who have like bourgeois consciousness. So that can make them like counter-revolutionary reformists, all kinds of problems, you know. So I don't know if he necessarily helps himself, but understandably he's fucking pissed off,
Yep.
rightfully so, about these kinds of issues. But I think that it is useful to frame it more so as like intra-class conflicts than anything else. You know, like intra-class, not only intra-class conflict, because of course there are settler colonizers who would actually be petty bourgeois and bourgeois and stuff like that. But you know, for that section who are like white and proletarian, even though they may occupy this position of labor aristocracy within the settler society, that still there can be contradictions with other strata of the proletariat, and we kind of it's challenging because we kind of need to manage it and make sure that it's not too much of an antagonistic contradiction, because at certain points historically it has been an antagonistic contradiction, and other points maybe it's not necessarily antagonistic. But yeah, sorry, I've been ranting a lot there.
No, you're good.
You jump in.
Two things that I wanted to add are that like this book is like very much, it speaks to the time that it was written. Like he wrote this I think in 78, or like he started writing it like around 78,
Mm,
and that was when settler colonialism was like just now being talked about as a like a sociological like phenomenon among the Black revolutionary left.
mm,
Um, at this time, the Black Liberation Army is still doing its urban guerrilla type thing. I think at the very beginning of this book, J. Sakai actually says like, uh, "I'm really depressed, and like all of my best friends, all of my best like comrades and stuff are either dead or in prison, and blah blah blah." And it was a very tumultuous time, and J. Sakai was very obviously influenced by Franz Fanon, and Franz Fanon in chapter 1 of Wretched of the Earth talks about how to analyze things scientifically in a colonial setting, sometimes race is like a superstructure in and of itself. So base, like the idea of base and superstructure is basically um, the mode of production, the production of new wealth is like so if you're in like a capitalist society or socialist society, that's where you want to look to understand the general trends in history and culture. But because we have like settler colonial societies where there's a colonizer and a colonized group of people, and the colonizer group of people wants to exploit the natural resources of the colonized, that itself is like very clearly like race is the delimiter there. So you can use phrases like a white like a mythological white proletariat, because there's like the colonizer proletariat who has way more stuff and a different relationship to the mode of production or the means of production than the colonized, if that makes any sense.
mm, mm,
The other thing is that J. Sakai's central claim, or one of his central claims, is that the white proletariat, quote unquote, is annexationist. Like white proletariat class consciousness, in J. Sakai's opinion, I'm not saying that I agree with this or that I disagree with this. We can get into that later.
mm,
But white proletariat, like settler consciousness, just wants to get more stuff and accumulate more stuff, which sets up a very interesting situation, because you can't because of the relationships to things like land and the means of production, wealth in general, the black left can't, or the colonized left more generally, can't have a politics of just like accumulating more stuff, because the growth of wealth among the white settlers is dependent on the exploitation of the colonized proletariat.
Hmm.
So in that way, Jasikai is saying literally that there is no white proletariat. White people always have extra proletarian privileges,
That's interesting,
and
yeah.
accumulate them based on their annexationist settler class consciousness.
Hmm. That's interesting. Like I didn't take that from the book when I read it first. That's an interesting
Really?
way. Yeah, I read the full book and I didn't quite get this idea that there actually wasn't a white proletariat, and that them being part of like this labor aristocracy was still them being part of the white proletariat. But well,
It's
that's what these conversations are for, to learn a little more about it.
Yeah, so I guess I should say, like, yes, scientifically, like, our white people, settlers, are scientifically exploited. Like, they don't, like, they add more value to society than they receive as a wage. Like,
Mm,
that is a fact. But where's actually, let me just quote the book. There was a
mm,
part in chapter one where he talks about why um there are like four central reasons why, like, out of every other settler colony, America is like the most right wing. Hold up,
mm.
let me just find it real fast, and you can talk about stuff if you want to. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm really interested to hear this. Yeah, no, because like what you're saying still, it still sounds to me pretty consistent with the standards understanding of the labor aristocracy as presented
Mhm.
like by Lenin, like in Imperialism and these other kind of texts. But so I'm interested to hear like what the differences are, and how that sort of plays out differently within the settler colonial context.
Sure, sure. Um, yeah. So chapter one, part three. It's Euro-American social structure.
Mm,
This is Jasikai saying like why America is like the most bourgeois nation like on earth.
mm.
So
No, I
quote,
remember that. Yeah.
when we point out that America is the most completely bourgeois nation in world history, we mean a fourfold reality. One, America had no feudal or communal past, but was constructed from the ground up from the ground up according to the nightmare vision of the bourgeoisie. Two, America began its national life as an oppressor nation, as a colonizer of oppressed peoples. Three, America not only has a capitalist ruling class, but all classes and strata of Euro Americans are bourgeoisified, with a preoccupation for petty privileges and property ownership, the normal guiding star of the white masses, and property ownership, the normal guiding star of the white masses. Four, America is so decadent that it has no proletariat of its own, but must exist parasitically on the colonial proletariat of oppressed nations and national minorities. So that's kind of where I would draw that claim. Do
Mm.
you disagree with my
No.
evaluation? Do you
That's
think that?
No. That's pretty that's pretty interesting. As he says right there. I mean, that's the proofs in the pudding, as they say right there. I mean, it's pretty clear. But I think if I'm not mistaken, in chapter four, he literally used the term labor aristocracy, and I wonder how that sort
Yeah.
of fits into the analysis, because at least my understanding is that labor aristocracy is part of the proletariat. It's not necessarily petty bourgeois. It actually is part of the proletariat.
Yes.
I wonder how do we sort of reconcile those things? Do you think that this might be kind of how can I say, more of like an eclectic understanding of class, or do you think that this is very calculated? Or do you think that this might be kind of like an error or an oversight, that there seems to be like a contradiction there, or in the popular sense of the term, or do you think that this is how it's meant to be? It was like calculated, and this is just his understanding of class or class analysis.
That's a really good question, and I kind of want to like pull up the PDF and like look for it, because I know that he does say something in chapter four, quoting Lenin, talking about labor aristocracy.
Hmm.
But man, that's a big question. Do you think it was intentional? Huh.
See, that's what it's so strange, because like that's what I took from it. I was like, okay, labor aristocracy. So, but that is by definition part of the proletariat. So, But here you've also just pulled this out like in the first chapter where he's saying like no, it's not proletariat. So that's so you can see like there's a little bit of confusion there and there's a little bit of a conflict and yeah, this is a problem for us to try and navigate, I suppose, you know.
Yeah, here's a pretty good quote that hopefully will add some clarity.
Mm,
This is from chapter 4. I literally just Control F looked up labor aristocracy.
cool.
So quote, all this was but the outward form of proletarian class consciousness, made all the more convincing because those white workers subjectively believed that they were proletarians, the exploited, the creators of wealth,
Mm,
sons of toil, etc., etc. Uh, in actuality, this was clearly untrue. While there were many exploited and poverty stricken immigrant proletarians, these new Euro American workers were, as a whole, a privileged labor stratum. As a labor aristocracy, it had, instead of a proletarian revolutionary consciousness, a petite bourgeois consciousness that was unable to rise above reformism.
mm. Yeah, so that's what I latched onto when I read it first. I was like, okay,
Mhm.
so very clearly labor aristocracy. Maybe this comes from like a different understanding of the term labor aristocracy that I'm not necessarily fully that I'd be fully familiar with. But my understanding of labor aristocracy would very much be. I'll pull up just the little term of labor aristocracy, so I'm not just
Mhm.
like pulling stuff from the air or
Sure.
from the sky. So Lenin in Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, 1916. Lenin describes labor aristocracy as a privileged upper stratum of the proletariat in the imperialist countries that lives partly at the expense of hundreds of millions in the uncivilized nations. Yeah, okay. Obviously, we're thinking like globally, internationally, and so on and so forth, and we're kind of bringing that into the United States, into America, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so like this I suppose this creates kind of issues and conflicts and a little bit of confusion for people when trying to read this, and not necessarily a very clear answer. Yeah,
Mhm.
I wonder if he's actually fleshed that out a little bit more as times went on, because there's definitely a little bit of confusion there, you know.
Okay, if I had to stick to one side of the that particular debate, I would probably say that Sakai is acknowledging that white settlers were scientifically exploited and were technically workers, like in the traditional way that you would think about it, but have petite bourgeois class consciousness.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. See, that's the thing. It's like petty bourgeois, like excuse me, petty bourgeois consciousness. Like they sort of feel themselves as part of that, you know. And that's kind of interesting. That's very interesting to me. It's not that they're objectively petty bourgeois, but they feel
mhm,
themselves to be like petty bourgeois, and
right,
so it's kind of this like false consciousness kind of thing, you know. So it's very interesting to analyze these things and to and try to
definitely,
figure it out,
definitely.
you know.
I wish I could ask Sakai. I think that
Yeah.
Sakai is actually like a moniker too. Like that's not his real name,
Ah,
if I remember correctly.
so all that time I
Yeah,
spent looking up Jay Sakai was for nothing. I
yeah,
tried to,
yeah. Because this guy is like an actual real revolutionary who had to like run from cops and stuff. So he
yeah, yeah,
probably has a million names. Who knows?
yep, yep.
Was it Ho Chi Minh or something who had like 900 different uh,
Badass.
names or whatever?
Yeah,
Yeah, something crazy like that.
badass. Meanwhile, I'm just here like a dick using my actual proper name on YouTube with my face. There's a big regret. There's a big regret
Yeah,
for me. But anyway,
that's ballsy. I mean, if you lived in America,
oh,
like,
yeah. I mean, you get shit anyway, but
man, the FBI
it's
would be like knocking on your door, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe they are. I mean, we all. What's that Rammstein song? Like, we all live in America. You know?
Yeah, right, right.
I'm sure the FBI or the CIA at some point will track me down. But while I still occupy a very small corner of YouTube, hopefully they'll leave me alone.
Hmm.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very, very much. Really, really interesting questions to get things started with, and it'll be very
Yeah,
interesting
super.
as we go further with the conversation here. Would you mind? Do you want to take like a little slight maybe detour and answer a question from the chat? Would you like to do that? Just
Yeah,
one.
sure. Let's do it.
Cool. So Biggie Smalls asks specifically for you, Simba. He says, "Hey Simba, what's your opinion on Maoist groups like the NPA, etc.?" So the National
My
People's Army.
opinion is oust Duterte. Like, I I
Class.
personally am not a Maoist proper, but like they've got their shit together. You know, they
Yeah, they
have an
do.
entire like infrastructure of governance and stuff that they have like the supply chain thing down. They like have actual small amounts of state power in some places. So as of now, it looks like they're pretty successful. I don't know how close they are to like finishing, quote unquote,
Mm,
finishing the small R revolution. Um,
mm,
but yeah, no, definitely critical support. Like I have a generally positive view. That's pretty much it. Even though I theoretically disagree with them on a few things here or
mm.
there, they know their situation better than I know their situation. I'm just some asshole on the internet with lots of opinions. So
Aren't we all? Here today, anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, actually, next Saturday I'm going to be doing a stream. I think pretty much this time next Saturday we're going to be doing a stream on that, on the NPA, on the CPP. You know, like this whole situation in the Philippines with Space Babies, who is a great
Cool.
MLM YouTuber, and so we're going
Mhm.
to be talking about it a little bit more. Between now and then, I have to really learn my shit about them
Yeah,
because
same. Like, I mean, the NPA or the Communist Party of the Philippines has like a 60-year history or something wild like
yeah,
that. So like I can't possibly keep up with everything that's happened.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah,
It's very
they
positive anyway
seem
from what I've seen. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, they seem like a pretty dynamic party. You got to be to stick around for that long.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Great, thank you very, very much. We'll come to a few more questions throughout the stream, and we'll
Mhm.
return to those a little bit later. So we'll return to settlers now and jump back into that. So let's go back into Settlers for people maybe who haven't read the book, who don't know anything about the book. Maybe now is the time we do kind of an overview. So we kind of talked a little bit about what Settlers isn't about and so on and so forth. But what is the basic premise of Settlers, and what are the implications of this analysis for our organizing as socialists and communists?
Okay, so Jay Sakai sides with a tradition called Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Third Worldism,
Hmm.
which is a lot of isms. I'm just going to shorten that down to Third Worldism. And there is something called the Three World Theses. The Three World Theses summed up, and Paul, you can tell me if I got something maybe wrong because I haven't read a whole ton of Third Worldist literature.
Hmm.
Um, but the basic premise is that there's the first world, that's like the United States, Western Europe,
Hmm.
um, all of these, what we would consider like the developed countries. There's the
Hmm.
second world, which doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And then there's the third world, which basically is caught in like the clash between those two. So
Yeah.
typically, um, what third worldists say is that national liberation is like incredibly good. Um, national liberation being like left wing nationalism. They say that um, Russia or the Soviet Union at the time was socially imperialist and no longer revolutionary. Depending on who you ask, there are people who say that like after like 1956, um, the USSR was like straight up not socialist anymore.
Hmm.
And so like the implications of that in like an American context are that basically the colonized people are the revolutionary subjects that we should be focused on when talking about who in America is like the most revolutionary.
Hmm.
Um, Jay Sakai goes as far as to say, and we've kind of summed this up a little bit, that like white people are just not revolutionary. Uh, even like the far left ones, like CPUSA and the Socialist Party, trade unions, etc. Like if you have settler class consciousness, you are probably not a revolutionary subject, or at least you're going to have to break through that barrier,
Hmm.
even if you are technically scientifically exploited.
Hmm.
America, it's important to know, is what's called a settler colony. A settler colony is a place where one population like removes, displaces, or straight up genocides another population with the intention to like move all of their stuff there and start a new society, which is exactly what the early settlers did.
Hmm.
Uh, and you know I think it's fair to say that practices of eugenics like were pretty common. So we would fall into the category of genocidal um, settler colonies. And America did not stop being a settler colony after like some X number of you know indigenous people were eliminated. So it is still currently a settler colony. Other
Mm,
examples of that phenomenon are Australia, New Zealand,
yeah.
South Africa, Zimbabwe, which my mom is from, um, and so a regular colony would be like, what would like a regular colony be? I don't know, somewhere like India, where like one population, the English, go to a place, but not with the intention to like create a whole new society and permanently live there. They
Mm,
went there to extract the wealth and not have anything to do with it otherwise.
mm,
So large groups of English people weren't moving into to India, where here the first colony in America was Jamestown, which is in my home state of Virginia, actually. And
mm,
literally, they went there for two things, which were gold and land.
mm,
So you would get a charter if you wanted to come to America. You'd get a charter from the Queen that says, once you get there, we haven't seen this land yet. We don't know, what the status of it is or if there are people there already. But when you get to America, you can have, I think the number was like 40 acres of whatever land you happen to like be on. And obviously, plenty of
mm.
that land was populated. And the book sort of opens with doing some myth busting surrounding the status of the earliest settlers here in America.
Mm, mm. Well, that was a really, really good overview, and thank you very much for explaining Three Worlds Theory and for explaining settler colonialism. And I'm always really interested to sort of think of like Ireland and how that fits into it as well. Sorry, I know it's my bias living in Ireland. I'm always thinking
No,
about
all
that,
good.
and I think about like the plantations that happened in Ireland and this sort of well, actively wiping out the people who actually lived here, who were from here, in favor of sort of importing these people from abroad, from Scotland primarily, especially in the 1600s. We talked a little bit about this before the stream started with the Ulster plantations, which were the most successful plantations in Ireland. But there were many other plantations as well, and there was very much an active, well, replacement going on there, which was
Yep.
well, pretty fucked up stuff. But
You
yeah,
bet.
so
You bet.
so
Yeah.
these
So
questions are
also,
important.
for sure. Last thing, like just so I don't forget, the premise of like, or the last part of the premise of the book is that because of the settler colonial history of America, white people have a fundamentally, according to Jay Sakai, once again, you don't have to agree with this,
Mm,
but white settlers, have a fundamentally different place that is less revolutionary than colonized people in any socialist movement.
mm,
And any decent socialist movement, according to Jay Sakai, once again, would center the needs of the colonized over the needs of the colonizers.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that. Yeah, I think that is interesting. I mean, we're talking about what like he's saying. We're not necessarily giving like our opinions on that fully yet. We're later on in the conversation. We're going to talk about a lot about the like criticisms and stuff like that and critiques of this text, and I think it's going to be very, very useful to sort of draw that out a little bit later. But yeah, thank you very much. I think that's very, very useful. And you did mention these. You mentioned like Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, like third worldism and stuff like that. And I know that a lot of people can be a little bit uncomfortable with the third worldist conclusions of this text. Even they might agree with like a lot of the text, but there's like a certain cutoff point where they're like, okay, but maybe the conclusions that are being drawn here aren't necessarily something that we would align with or would agree with. But yeah,
Right.
we can sort of we can tease that out a little bit more as we go. And yeah, I would just say like. I can even see people in the chat now, like people, very much wanting to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. You disagree with one or 2 points, or you point out a few things that are incorrect in the text, and that's it. It's gone. You just throw it all away, which is a little bit of an issue. I mean, we should
Right.
definitely we should discard the stuff that doesn't work, that's not useful to us. But if there is some useful stuff in there, and I would say that there is probably some useful stuff in here. I mean, I don't think that's a controversial statement. But we should definitely have a look at that as well. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very, very much, comrade. Brilliant. And but just on the next, there's another question here, which it's kind of related to. We talked a little bit about like settler colonialism. I think it would be interesting just to talk before we take any other questions from the chat here, and before, I don't want to break things up like too much, with this analysis of settler colonialism, how can we understand groups of people who were forced to relocate to colonies, such as like Jewish people fleeing persecution, prisoners relocating to Australia, and so on and so forth? And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that particular question with regard to this.
Yeah. Australia specifically was like kind of a debtor's colony. So if
Mm.
you owed a whole bunch of money and you couldn't pay it back, and no other punishment seemed applicable to that situation, they would ship you off from Great Britain all the way to some other place on the other end of the world. And then eventually, Australia developed its own government, its own society, and murdered plenty of indigenous people somewhere in that
Unbelievably.
process.
It's like, what is, like, over 90% or something like that.
Yeah.
It's really horrific.
Yeah, it's something absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, so sorry, just backing up. What
Yeah.
was the specific question?
Oh, just if you have any thoughts
Like,
on how we can sort of understand the role of people who were forced to relocate. But as you've kind of said, I mean, they were
yeah,
forced maybe initially, but that's kind of transformed as time has went on. And
yes, yeah. So, especially if we at any point want to talk about Bacon's Rebellion, um, and stuff, there are certain like points in history where like those kinds of people, like Australians, or um, I think the same situation with New Zealand, although I'm a little less keen on New Zealand history, but there are like these critical junctures where all of a sudden you kind of like have a group of settlers realize that they're actually getting exploited and allying with different groups of colonized people against the wealthy on the basis of wealth rather than on the basis of race.
mm,
And rich people got keen to that pretty quick and said, like, nope, absolutely, we're not going to have this. We'll just elevate the status of white people just enough, just a tiny little itty bitty bit to make them less revolutionary, and then crack down really hard on colonized people.
mm,
So while that group, groups of people who were coerced to go to a settler colony were at one point revolutionary in many cases, that is not the case today, as the category of whiteness has kind of been shaped and molded over time to force any kind of like revolutionary potential out of those groups of people, according to Jessica.
mm, mm. Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was really, really useful, and a very interesting take on it. And as you said, I mean, it's backed up historically by what's happened in Australia, and it's tragic. It's tragic to see what's happened there as well. And of course, like, I don't know if you can say that Irish people were necessarily forcibly like relocated generally to America, to the United States and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely like Irish Americans definitely did. Even though they may have had like revolutionary potential at one stage, very much Irish
Yeah.
Americans very much assimilated to this kind of white supremacist position in society, and very much had a strong role in the police force, and yeah, like all of the same problems that you can imagine with the
Yeah,
rest
there are a
of
lot
white
of
people.
really weird situations like that, where, like, for example, 2% of indigenous people at peak, like around like 19, or sorry, not 19, 1863, like 2 or 3% of indigenous people owned slaves. So you have like weird situations like that where a colonized group of people will try to behave more like the colonizers in order to be accepted
Yeah,
by bourgeois society.
yeah. Yeah. Oh Jesus, that's a heartbreak. That's a heartbreaking thing to point out, because
Isn't it though? Yeah.
it's everywhere. It's everywhere. You see this with all kinds of colonized people. And like, I hate bringing it back to Ireland, because I know it's not necessarily, it's not really a fair like one to one comparison. Like, it's really not. But you can see the same elements of this happening like in Ireland as well. Like, you will see like a lot of Irish people historically would have tried to replicate like the Brits, and like put on like British accents. Like, they'd speak with like London accents,
Mhm.
sort of we would call them like West Brits here in Ireland. But it's just that kind of role of being kind of this a colonial subject, especially historically. Things have changed obviously in the last few decades. Ireland, through accession to the EU, has very much sort of become part of this like imperialist core. It's gained that kind of status that it didn't necessarily have historically, like 100 years ago and stuff like that. But yeah, now anyway, here we are, and yeah, it's sad, but as you said, people are just trying to do what they can to survive, I suppose. And
Yeah, absolutely.
in these fucked up societies. So yeah. Anyway, brilliant. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you drawing that out. Um, will we take another question or two? Is that okay with you? And then we can return maybe.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll talk about some critiques afterwards and some useful critiques I think afterwards, and how we can sort of approach them. But for now we'll take a couple of questions from the chat, a question or two from the chats. Let's see here. Now, here's a question. Armando Vedando. I'm probably pronouncing that really badly, so I apologize, Armando, comrade. Paul, how does settlers fit in Latin America? Aren't the descendants of white settlers here in Latin America also exploited by imperialism? Now, that's an interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on
That
that?
is a really interesting
The
question. Yeah. So, I will start by saying like Latin American settler colonialism and stuff like that. That's not exactly my lane, but I'll try to answer to the best of my ability.
please.
Are situations like Brazil, former Portuguese colony, is probably like the most bourgeois country in. It's fair to say that it's been like that, partly because of the role of the United States in assassinating left-wing leaders and stuff like that.
Mm,
But they have like a pretty bad racism problem as well. Because I mean, when we look at people from Latin America, like here in North America, like they look Latin American, but there are actually white Bolivians, white this that like,
yeah, of course.
and most of them are wrapped up into an ethnicity called mestizo, which is like half indigenous, half. Those are like the sons and daughters of whatever group of colonizers were there who also had um, you know indigenous people, but have mostly kept to people who look European.
Mm,
And that's kind of like it's sad because I've heard it referred to as like kind of a caste society, where indigenous people and Afro Latin people are like really not just looked down on, but legislated against actively, uh, and oppressed. There are, however, interesting enough, a couple of different holdouts within northeastern Brazil, I think it is, where people like are still practicing the religion of their African colony. Most of these slaves in the transatlantic slave trade actually went to Brazil, not the United States. The United States, I think, had 2/3 the number of slaves, but as Brazil, but like yeah, so that's kind of interesting to me because I
mm,
don't know why, but like African religions didn't stick around here in the States that much.
mm.
Of course, like we're actively beaten out of slaves, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I think that somebody smarter than I should take that question wherever. Oh, actually, you know what? Read Open Veins of Latin America. That's a very good book, and maybe I'll reread it and get back to this question at a later date.
That'd be cool. Yeah. If there are any people who are far smarter than young Simba, it's not fucking me. So if there's anyone in the chat here who has some really good takes on this, then I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on that particular question because it is interesting. My wife's from Brazil, and there are huge issues like with racism, and indigenous people just have like these horrific times. But as you said, there are still like proper indigenous traditions there, and but yeah, like as you said, like slavery was massive there, and there's so many problems. But yeah, as I said, they are of course subject to all kinds of imperialist exploitation, but at the same time they still have their own internal problems as well. So yeah, definitely need someone who's smarter than than me
Both of
anyway.
us, yeah.
Yeah, maybe yeah to discuss this one in detail, or at least someone who's done like the research and studied it properly. Because
Mhm.
otherwise we're just going to give them like thoughts and opinions. And yeah, maybe check out that book. The veins. What did you call it? The veins of Latin America.
The Open Veins
Open.
of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano, who
Okay, I'll write that down.
he's a great historian. His biggest thing, or his biggest passion project was looking at how CIA intervention in Latin America proliferates torture.
Oh,
Active in yeah in teaching different right-wing regimes in Latin America like the most effective ways to terrorize people.
Wow.
And so he in that book he talks brought torture to Latin America and its settler colonial history.
Mm. Mm.
Really good book, heartbreaking, but really good book.
Yeah, definitely. I can 100% imagine that. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Open Veins of Latin America. Gonna have to read that one, and we can do part two of the stream and talk about that at some stage, maybe.
Yeah,
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much.
sure.
Let's go ahead and take a look at Settlers again. We'll return and we'll talk about some of the criticisms. After this, we can return and take a few more questions. But for now, let's take a look at some of the big criticisms. So, what do you think are some genuine good faith criticisms of the text that you think are fair and should be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that Jay Sakai unfortunately like puts a whole lot less emphasis on the scientific side, like the very like base heavy side of Marxism, and he talks about Marxism as if it's almost totally superstructural.
Mm,
And I think that he really misses out on, especially in the early some of like the revolutionary activity that like actually was going on at the time. I think in chapter 6 he talks about the IWW and how the IWW didn't do anything about like or for independence, for example.
mm.
And it's like, okay, I get what you're talking about, but like the IWW up until that point was like the only shit about black people, like ever. And I'm not saying that like, hey, if you're so dedicated to this idea, why didn't you talk about like this topic? But like literally he like does mudslinging at the IWW when like they did actually have a whole lot of organizing with white people
Mm.
against racism explicitly for the purpose of overthrowing the wage system. So that to me is just like a little bit sectarian, which is something that you do find a little bit about. Um, it's also clear, and I think that you mentioned this, that like like two people being exploited in the same way does have like a legitimate impact on consciousness, and so like calling white people like labor aristocracy but also they're somehow
Mm.
bourgeoisie like doesn't quite line up, so there's like that kind of contradiction.
Yeah, it's a little bit
Cool dog.
confusing. Probably needs to be fleshed out a little bit
Yeah.
more, and it's kind of like he probably needs to pick a side on that. Like which one is it? Because that is really important in terms of like organizing socialists and communists.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
definitely,
And it's not to say that there
definitely.
aren't like obviously class traitors. There are, but we also need to look at like the material incentives built into the class, the material conditions you find yourself in, the class position you find yourself in. So yeah, as you said, like there are some groups that are more revolutionary than others, and yeah, whether or not they're labor aristocracy or they are definitively petty bourgeois, that does change things, and it's probably an important point that should be brought out a little bit. It's interesting that you mentioned the IWW and how maybe he was maybe a little bit unfair with regard to them, given that they were like the only people who were, as you said, kind of actively trying to improve life for the colonized people. Did you have any thoughts on this William Z. Foster, from the CPUSA? I know a lot of people have made the criticism that Sakai has taken his words out of context. He's actually, in some cases, manipulated the words, and I've seen a couple of pictures which would suggest that actually maybe he did slightly take some things out of context, and maybe emphasize some parts that wasn't necessarily a good faith reading of what William Z. Foster was saying. Now, I have a very cursory understanding of William Z. Foster, who he was, what he did, and so on and so forth. I know obviously
Yeah,
that
same.
like I know like he was the CPUSA. To my knowledge, it was at a pretty important time. There was a lot of work being done in these areas. And but I think that of course Sakai was extremely critical of him in particular, and a lot of people think that that's quite unfair. for similar reasons to what you described with the IWW. Have you heard anything about this or engaged with this particular point at all, or?
Um, I didn't hear that he was taken out of context. I think um it's actually been a little while since I read that part, but
Mm,
Sakai said something to the effect of the early 20th century. There was this problem where workers would strike, but like some of the unions were segregated. So if you had like white union, the boss could still just pay black people white man wages to scab.
mm.
That at some point William Z. Foster said something like black people are like a race of scabbers, like professional scabbers or something like that. And
Oh,
yeah, pretty bad.
yeah.
But if I didn't hear anything about that being straight up incorrect or a misquote or taken out of context,
Mm.
do you happen to know
I actually,
that
yeah,
that's
I can.
incorrect?
Let me see if I could. I'm gonna try and pull something up on this now. I'm not sure if it's gonna be worth actually showing to the audience or putting it up on screen. Um, but just give me 1 second. I'm just gonna pull this up, and it's there's a couple of threads that like go into this. It's kind of on informal sources, like you'll find like threads on like Reddit where they go into it, and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
there's kind of like okay, let me see. I've got something here. Um, okay. All right. So yeah, actually, this is the quote that you were talking about there. I might actually, I might just, I can read them out. Do you want me to read out the versions? Because there's like one version. There's the version that Sakai presented in the book, and then there's
Mhm.
like the full quote of what Foster actually said beside this. Will I read the two of them, and it might be useful.
Sure.
I'm not sure. Like, look, this is just like a picture that someone showed me. I don't know if this is 100% like fact checked, but it seems that Sakai maybe uh changed things a little bit. But anyway, let's have a little read. I'll read it out to you. I'll see if I can pull it up on screen here. Actually, just give me 1 second while I do that, just so the people in the chat can kind of see what I'm talking about. Um, see here. Okay. Can you see this on the screen? I'm not sure if you've got the video open. Simba, can you see that?
Oh, uh,
It might
y-
it might be
I've
useful.
got.
I've put it up on the screen
Oh
there.
yeah, yeah.
I
Cool,
put it up on
cool.
the screen there at the moment. So I'll just quickly read this out. And look, again, I haven't verified this. This is just something that someone sent me. I'm not sure we can talk about it and see if it's true or not. But okay, so Sakai said, and I apologize if I say anything like offensive. I'll try to skip any of the like offensive words or whatever like that. Sakai says Foster's lynch mob oratory was only restrained by the formality expected of a Euro-American communist leader. His white supremacist message was identical to, but more politically clothed than the crude rants of the Ku Klux Klan. He warned that the capitalists were grooming Africans as a race of strikebreakers with whom to hold the white workers in check, on much the same principle as the Tsars used the Cossacks to keep in the subjugation of the Russian people. It's easy to see how Foster became such a popular leader among the among the settler workers. So that's Sakai's presentation of it there. Apparently, this is what Foster actually said below this. Foster said, so serious was the race situation in the steel strike that the National Committee for Organising Iron and Steel Workers requested President Gompers to arrange a conference between prominent Negro leaders and trade union officials to the end that proper remedies may be indicated. The need for action looking towards better relation between whites and blacks in the industrial field should be instantly patent, for there can no doubt but there can be no doubt but that the employing class, taking advantage of the bitter animosities of the two groups, are deliberately attempting to turn the Negroes into a race of strike breakers. And again, sorry if the words are fucked up, I feel weird even saying them. Into a race of strike breakers with whom to hold the white workers in check, on much the same principles as the Tsars used the Cossacks to keep in subjection the balance of the Russian people. Should they succeed to any degree, it would make out industrial disputes take on more and more the character of Nazi masturbation fantasies, a consummation that would be highly injurious to the white workers and eventually ruinous to the blacks. So yeah, it's like, so can you see that? Can you were you able to read that as I was speaking it outwards?
Yeah.
What do you
Hmm.
think of that? What does that, do you think that changes anything, or what are your thoughts when you sort of read that and hear that?
Um. Yeah.
It's still a bit
I,
dodgy. It's still not, like
yeah.
perfect.
It's still a
Not
little
great.
dodgy, but it sounds like the most charitable way, I guess you could interpret it, is maybe or I don't know. We have the quote right here. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's kind of a bad look, but
It's a bad look,
it's
yeah.
not exactly the same
Yeah, yeah. It's not
as
exactly the
what
same,
Sakai
but
is saying.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's a little
so
bit
maybe
different,
you
but
could say, yeah,
yeah.
maybe you could
But
say that.
thing is, I've seen people like literally just just show these quotes and say just throw away the entire book because of this. The entire book is discredited because of this, because of like literally just what you're
Okay.
seeing right here, which I also think is pretty ridiculous and pretty unfair, you know.
Yeah, that's silly because this is like the quote is correct, but yeah, maybe some more context, like the two sentences after the highlighted part, or the one
Mm,
sentence after the highlighted part,
yeah,
would have been
yeah,
probably appropriate to put in there.
yeah, yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
But
anyway,
yeah, no, I mean, like,
sorry, you go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, like, if that's like the most incorrect, or like one of the only things that's like incorrect, or at least
Mm,
I would hope it is, then yeah, it's fine. Like, you can't throw away the entire book just because of this.
yeah.
Oh, have you heard the like Althusser kind of criticism of settlers and third
Oh,
worldism more
no, I
generally?
haven't. I haven't actually. I'd love to hear it.
So I'm gonna try and make this as simple as I can. But basically, the Althusser's really big contributions were like on the topic of ideology. I
Hmm.
think was he French
Yeah,
or
he was
Italian?
French. Yeah, ah, one of those.
French, yeah.
French,
He was from
Italian,
Western Europe.
Western Europe
Yeah.
guys. Yeah.
So his topic of study was mostly about ideology, and he claimed that there were two different kinds of state apparatuses. State being, you know, the apparatus that the bourgeoisie uses to uphold bourgeois power and, produce and reproduce the state of the world that the bourgeoisie likes. So that would be things like the police, the army, probably, the structure of government in many cases.
Mm.
And Althusser says no, actually it's even more totalizing than that. So there are ideological state apparatuses, which are things like church and school and like all of anything like mass media, like anything that projects ideas that are friendly to class domination. Um, and basically, like, Althusser would probably say something to the effect of that white unions and churches and different ideological state apparatuses like that are actually um, affecting settler class consciousness. And it's so at that point, like,
Mm.
how do I put this? Like the reach of the state is so large and is so impactful on ideology that racism, like in America, is like an ideological state apparatus that coerces people who are
Jesus.
colonized or colonizers to act a different way, rather than being scientifically like a different class.
Wow, that's I've heard a lot about this actually, the ISA, the like ideological state apparatuses, and it's something that like I've been sort of like interested in learning a lot about for quite a while, but I haven't I haven't sat down and read Althusser as of yet. But yeah, that's an interesting way. That's an interesting way of looking at it, and yeah, I'm gonna have to investigate that a little bit more. So please, if you have any recommendations to learn a little bit more about this, I'd love to hear them and dive into it a bit more.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm trying to look through, but Althusser is like notoriously difficult to read. He's not like Hegel or something, but he's pretty bad. But
Hmm.
all
That's why I like
one sec.
Connolly and Stalin. Nice and simple to read.
Yeah, definitely Connolly and Stalin are very easy to read. I think with Stalin, I mean, he's easy to read because he like was in a government of people who had just learned how to read, basically.
Yep.
Uh, Lots of illiteracy in Russia before the revolution.
Mm.
Um,
Even his earlier text, I think he was still quite clear. He didn't fuck
yeah,
around.
that's
You know,
it,
he was
definitely.
which but you know I think it's also because like he, even though he actually was quite an advanced student growing up, he did grow up very poor, and I think that probably influenced it a little bit. You know, he grew up very poor, and so he kind of wanted to maybe write in a way that's a little bit more accessible and easily understandable and comprehensible by lots and lots of people, which is maybe not necessarily something that you'll see with people who come from like bourgeois or petty bourgeois backgrounds who like to, let's say, flare their feathers a bit, show off their linguistic capabilities a little bit sometimes, and you will find that like in Marx and sometimes in Lenin, the earlier Lenin, it can be a little bit difficult to understand what's going on as well. But yeah. Anyway, so
Definitely, but like I'll never, or not never, but it's really difficult to find a person that you could just like recommend Stalin to.
you can't. You literally. Well,
It's
I mean, like for people who actually like are Marxists and stuff like that, it's grand. But like, but you can't just say like to someone like on the road, you just meet like you're handing out leaflets or something like that, or a flyer or something. You should definitely read Principles of Leninism, or
yeah,
or
seriously. Oh my God.
or Marxism and the National Question, or whatever like that. It's because obviously people just have their notions. They think that Stalin is Hitler, and that's probably part of this like ISA thing, this Althusser thing, like the ideological state apparatus. It's probably part of that as well, But
Yeah, definitely. And
yeah,
this is also not an effort to like rehabilitate Stalin on my part. I just think that he writes well.
yeah. I think his writing
Yeah,
is absolutely fantastic. But yeah,
and
that,
any
that that doesn't obviously exonerate or excuse other things that were incorrect or whatever.
sure, exactly. Like, I mean, you don't have to like absolutely everything a person did to, learn from them.
Yeah, definitely.
We're all adults here, right?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I would appreciate if people didn't take such a idealist view of these things, like just like such and such a person is 100% good or 100% bad or whatever it might be. Which you do see, like we're seeing it today all the time. Like Sakai is evil, Sakai is Jesus, Sakai
Yeah.
is like people get very extreme about these things. You can understand. You can have nuance in these conversations, and
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's useful for everybody to approach it with such a perspective. So yeah, brilliant.
Mhm.
We've been talking about a few critiques there. I think there's a couple of other critiques as well. I'm just noticing in the questions that we prepared beforehand. Will we maybe talk a little bit about Rashid Johnson's criticisms as well? Maybe we'll talk about JMP's criticisms as well. What do you think?
Yeah, sure, sure. Um, Rashid Johnson, in particular, he's the Minister of Defense for the New African Black Panther Party prison chapter, which is a mouthful of a name. But he's super smart. He's a theorist as well as an activist, and he's currently incarcerated, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Free Rashid Mod.
Yep.
And his sort of criticism is almost entirely just like, hey, wait, there are literally like white people who are paid wages. That means that they're workers definitionally. If all you have to sell is your labor, and you have to be a laborer, a worker. So I don't know that he gets too far into the reasons why the white working class behaves differently than the colonized working class, but that's like basically his critique.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So yeah. So I know he's written a little bit as well. I know there's quite a short video. I think over on the Peace Reports channel as well.
Mhm.
I was a little bit confused as well. He kind of, how can I say, muddied the waters as well when he says that by designating settlers as part of the labor aristocracy, this separates them
Mhm.
from the proletariat. Which again, it seems to be this kind of confusion with regard to whether or not the labor aristocracy is a part of the proletariat or if they're a part of the petty bourgeoisie. And yeah, so I was a little bit confused when I was reading some of what he was saying there. But again, like I don't know. I don't know. I
Yeah,
did.
definitely Jay could have been much more specific and
Yeah.
pointed about how he talks about labor aristocracy versus petty bourgeoisie. And
Yeah.
typically, like around the time that the term was coined, aristocracy that like referred to people who were like in unions and
Oh,
just
that's
kind
right.
of
Yeah.
like got comfortable in their job and like weren't actually bourgeoisie but like weren't revolutionary either. It was like something like that.
Yeah, that's right. There's
Um,
like it was before Lenin as well. I'm kind of using the Leninist definition here, but I mean, yeah, you're right.
okay.
It was before then as well. I mean, maybe it was like I don't know who was like Bukharin or something like that who maybe talked about it. A couple of anarchists would have talked about it like in the late 1800s as well. If you look it up, you'll find a couple of different definitions of it. But yeah, generally the one that I would go by would be Lenin's definition. With regard to like imperialism and stuff like that. That is to say, the definition that I mentioned earlier on, which was that the labor aristocracy is the privileged upper stratum of the proletariat in the imperialist countries who live partly at the expense of hundreds of millions in the uncivilized nations. Although we can we critique that point of uncivilized nations as probably we want to. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's generally the kind of definition that I'd be going along with.
Mhm.
It seems to be a little bit different to how it's being used in a lot of these conversations. So yeah, we might.
So for you, who fits in that category?
Well, I mean, I think that probably a lot of people probably a lot of the settler people in the United States definitely would 100%. I think most people in imperialist cores would fit into that category. Definitely people who are like in professional positions. But one of the things that Lenin explains in Imperialism, High Stage Capitalism, is that it's not necessarily just that these people get like a high wage, and that is obviously a part of it. Like some people, he talks about them being bribed with imperialist super profits. So of course there's people who have like really high salaries, high wages, etc., etc. But there's also other ways as well, like even just like let's say for example, like your free healthcare, free education that you have like in Western social democracies. That's another way of bribing people off. Bribing people away from gaining any kind of real serious revolutionary consciousness. Other things like cheap food. Like if you're in Europe, we have these shops called Lidl and Aldi, where food is incredibly cheap. So even if you're on like let's say like minimum wage, even if you're like an average minimum wage worker here in Ireland, you can live like a pretty decent quality of life. You're not really going to be starving. You're going to have a pretty decent quality of life, and so these are ways that we are kind of pacified. We're made comfortable enough that we don't necessarily always immediately want revolution. We'd be more satisfied and pacified, and we would go for reform rather than revolution. So I'd say a lot of people would fit into this category, especially people like in let's say Europe, Western Europe in particular, the United States, Canada, but definitely Northern Europe as well, Scandinavian. Like look at Norway would be a really really good example of people who live there generally. But that's not to say like everybody is. There are of course people who are in much more precarious and much more difficult positions. But yeah, I don't know. I don't want to sound like too like third worldist about this. I don't want to go too much down that path. I do think there is revolutionary potential there. Um, but yeah, I can also see it like when I'm talking to most people, even in Ireland, that a lot of them are very very much pacified, and there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to be done. Even in like my area, which would be like a very like working class, very like impoverished area, like Tala in Dublin. It's very much like the kind of the lowest rung, but at the same time, like the quality of lives that people have even here could be considered, almost like Beverly Hills quality of life compared to the sort of poverty that I've seen in places like where my wife's from, like in Brazil or like in the global south. So yeah, it does have kind of a pacifying effect, and it's difficult to kind of challenge that. So yeah, it's not
Yeah.
as cut and dry as I'd like it to be, but that's kind of what I've observed and what I've seen and stuff like that. So
Okay.
what do you think?
Interesting.
What do you
Interesting.
think when you hear labor aristocracy? What's your understanding of it?
Okay. So when I hear labor aristocracy, yeah, I'm mostly thinking about the first world or the developed countries.
Hmm.
Um, But to me, I guess the people I would put in there aren't people who have extra proletarian privileges, but like the sort of professionals who have like probably own a house, probably own a car,
Mm,
probably not struggling too hard to be able to feed themselves. Like anybody who's in like a sort of professionalish position that has like a cushy job
mm,
that allows them to live what we would think of as like the American dream with
mm,
a dog and two kids and
mm.
not have to struggle like that badly. So increasingly that's going to be like baby boomers. Um oh also like if you're doing gig work, like there's no way that you're labor aristocracy.
Yeah, no
um
way.
so increasingly like less millennials are in the labor aristocracy type, maybe like middle managers, folks like I'm trying to avoid talking about wages, like the amount of money that you actually make,
Yeah, of
because a
course.
lot of people have,
It can confuse.
yeah, a lot of people have the misconception that like lots of money is what class is.
Mm,
So when no, it's about the relationship
that's
to
right.
your the relationship you have to the means of production. Um, but yeah, anybody in those kinds of positions who is guaranteed 2 weeks paid time off every year and has health insurance. If you live in America, which how depressing is that? Um,
Yep.
but yeah, that sort of person. I don't typically think of people who can make it, but only just barely. To me, that just indicates your level of class consciousness rather than your class in general.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, that's a really really good way of summing it up. Summing up something which is quite difficult to like to pin down, you know. But I think that's very useful and very relevant because you know if you can just like
Mhm.
imagine someone who, as you said, like imagine like American dream, someone who has like this kind of American dream life. You know, they've got a family, they've got they're able to look after kids, they've got a car, a house, whatever it might be. So you're not necessarily going to be super incentivized to go out and do a revolution tomorrow when you've got so much to lose. And so I suppose, yeah, that's kind of a nice way of thinking about it. Although obviously there's more to it, but yeah, that's one way of thinking about it, which I think is a nice way of kind of grounding things a little bit. Would you consider like people in that sort of position? Would you still consider them to be like proletarian as well, but still parts of the proletariat, or would you consider them to be sort of closer to petty bourgeois, or would you kind of consider them to be like proletarian, but they kind of have a petty bourgeois kind of mindset or petty bourgeois interests, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah. So to me, that kind of person is exactly not the target of any kind of like revolutionary movement that I would say. I personally think that we should be looking to like the lowest of the low, so that would be indigenous, black, you know,
Mm,
colonized people here in the states. But yeah, they are like those kinds of people are scientifically exploited.
mm,
Um,
mm,
I think that if you're in a position that has hiring and firing power, then I would almost maybe not consider you working class, unless you're like managing like literally a restaurant or something. Then like yeah, you're probably working class ish. But the fact that you have hiring and firing power means that you're like petite bourgeoisie,
mm,
probably.
mm.
Or sorry, I just contradicted myself. Um,
It's okay. These are
it's because you have hiring and
grounding.
firing power, you are petite bourgeoisie because of your relationship to the means of production. Because
Yeah.
like if you have hiring power, like you're doing everything that your boss wants you to do, right? You're
Mm.
gonna want to
Do you think?
increase profits.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this argument as well. Like, it's kind of
Good.
their position within like the chain of production. They sort of become like the arbiters of this. So they're carrying out the wills of the bourgeoisie and stuff like that. Where do you think? Where would you put police on that? Would you characterize them categorically as petty bourgeois, or would you see them in any sort of relation to like labor aristocracy, proletarian? Do you have any thoughts on?
Um,
I know this is not something we
yeah,
decided we were going to talk about beforehand. These are all just things that I'm thinking about now, but.
no, you're good. You're good. That's a good question. Typically, I think of them as like a state element rather than like a class element. Um, just because like it's not very useful for me to like do a psychoanalysis of like this or that cop. It's like they're just a part of the to me at least they're just a part of like our settler colonial uh political machinery that and they're like the violent arm of it. So I in what like cops think, I'm more interested in what cops do,
Mm.
which hopefully is stay far away from me.
Well, fingers crossed anyway. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Brilliant. Oh,
So
yeah. So thank you very much for that. There was one more critique and criticism that I think is quite useful for people to read. Uh, JMP's take. Do you want to talk a little
mhm.
bit about JMP's take on this? This is I can never. Can you pronounce his name? I can't pronounce his name. Can you?
JMO Fawad Paul.
There you
I
go.
want to say that about you.
Mofu. I
Yeah,
can't
I
pronounce
don't
that.
know. I mean, pardon the pronunciation if it's completely wrong,
Yeah.
but that's kind of how I read it. It's actually been a pretty long time since I read this criticism. Um,
I'm just gonna put actually a link
but
to
I
it in
think that
the
he comes
chat
to
for people if they
cool,
want to
cool.
have a little read of that for themselves.
Yeah, I think that he and Kevin Rashid Johnson say that Settlers is not a Marxist book because it replaces the racial aspect of the superstructure with, the economic mode of production of the base. Like it is very much like Jay Sakai is saying that being black is being proletariat and being white is being bourgeoisie. Like it almost feels like that sometimes.
Mm,
And
yeah.
Rashid Johnson and JMP like really, really take issue with that.
Yeah. Although, well, what I will say is, it did seem to me that JMP was he had a lot more nuance to his take. Like he very much took like kind of like what we were saying like about like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like even though it is problematic and there are some issues there, we can still learn from it and stuff like that. Which he had there's a quote from this which I think is pretty useful for maybe some of the people who are watching this right now. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Yeah. So. Okay, so in this particular critique, he says that here is a sad example of the fallacy of composition. If some of the parts are wrong, if they are wrong, then the whole must be wrong as well. Now, this is something we see people doing all the time. For example, we talked about that little quote earlier on, the Foster, the William Z. Foster quotes. So this is important. Just continuing on, as you said, I doubt these reviewers would apply the same faulty reasoning to those pieces of acceptable left-wing theory that they study and love. Would they dismiss Marx's analysis of capitalism because some of its abstractions do not accord with exceptional concrete moments? I would hope not. Most probably, if an anti-Marxist told the New Socialist reviewer that capital should be dismissed because of the potential problems in some of its abstractions, the reviewer would probably reply, although one is never sure these days, that the abstractions were necessary in order to establish scientific categories. So I do think that's important. He does take nuance, even though he has his criticisms, he has critiques of it. At the same time, he's very much making the argument that we don't need to just like throw the baby out with the bathwater. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's useful to sort of frame that conversation. And I think everybody should. I think everybody should really take that on board. You don't need to have like this super extreme position on this book where you're saying like it's all terrible, fuck that, or it's all amazing, I love this, best thing in the world. Like, you can have a nuanced take on it, and yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
you know.
our chat is like definitely not into nuance like in
Yes,
the
this
last
this is weird. Like
few minutes.
I've never had a chat that was so polarized. Actually, oh no, I have actually. Whenever I released videos on fascism, when the actual fascists came in,
Oh god, yeah,
then yeah,
yeah, no
okay,
doubt.
it was pretty polarized then. But no, like this is it. Like people get extremely polarized and get very excited and angry and frustrated and yeah. So this is why I think it's kind of useful for us to have these conversations. Maybe just try and add a little more nuance to it and explore the stuff a little bit more. Do you know?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Um, yeah, people just have like a really visceral reaction to settlers and talking about race, and it's
Yeah,
a lot of people just hate it for the wrong reasons. Like
yeah,
if you think that it's incorrect, then fine. You should be able to explain that to me without like saying that the entire thing is like absolute garbage because of this one claim.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
Um,
definitely agree with that. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So
yep.
what does JMP say that Sakai gets correct? I kind of forgot.
Hmm. Let me see. Let me have a little look here. I'm actually reading through. This is so rude for the people who are watching this. We're just like reading. We're just like reading through the text
Oh,
here.
I
Have you found one
do
there?
you mind if I just quote it?
Yeah, if you found the quote there, please.
'Cause he says some interesting stuff about labor aristocracy, and hopefully that clears some things up.
Oh,
All
here we
right.
go.
So, quoting JMP. So when Sakai argues that the white working class of North America constitutes, within the confines of settler society, a labor aristocracy, a valid counterargument is not to snidely point out, as if Sakai was historically ignorant, that there is no such thing as a labor aristocracy because these white settlers were actually poor, exploited, and callously used by the colonizing aristocracy and bourgeoisie. Sakai already accepts that this was the case, but is tired of the colonial ideology that asks the colonizer to recognize that the settler working class is also exploited. Following Fanon and every anti colonial theorist, Sakai wants to examine the ideology that permits the settler working class to occupy an oppressing position. He wants to answer the question asked by Amin and others: why did this white working class, as a class, fail to generally become a class for itself? What were the terms of composition in America? It arrived as predatory. Sakai argues that with a significant amount of historical data, and what were the historical and materialist reasons for this structural development? It is not valid to cite the sporadic moments in North American history when the white working class got it right as evidence against Sakai's position. There are often exceptions to the general rule, and it is not as if Sakai has dismissed these exceptions. He discusses, for example, the IWW. Settlers is attempting to map the development of the ideology Sakai calls settlerism, the material conditions behind its emergence, and its ramifications for the class struggle.
That's a good quote. Nicely
Yeah,
done for pulling
yeah,
off that one.
that clears up a whole bunch
Mm.
for me.
Yeah, well, it does. Well, yeah, it does, but it kind of confuses me a little bit as well because it's Sakai arguing that the white working class of North America constitutes within the confines of settler society a labor aristocracy. So it's still a little bit confusing for me because it still is
Mhm.
situating this labor aristocracy within the working class, within the proletariat. You know, so that's where I'm still a little bit confused with this understanding. The way Sakai is understanding it here is it seems to be the way that I was understanding it, but it's a lot of other people don't seem to be understanding it that way. They seem to have sort of interpreted it as though they were outside, like, and as you said, like there is no white proletariat. It doesn't within the settler society, it doesn't exist. So this is why it still kind of causes me a little bit of confusion and like most people, it seems from looking at like the chat and stuff like that, it seems that most people took this away from it. The position that you were suggesting earlier on, and that everyone else is suggesting that like white people can't be part of the proletariat. In the US. So it was a little bit confusing for me.
No, I definitely get it. Um, I see a couple of people asking like, what is Settlers even about? So just for the people who are like new and weren't here in the beginning, Settlers is basically about um, literally like America is a settler colony. There are settlers here. How do they think? Why is it that they don't behave like the proletariat in a lot of other countries? Why is America so far right wing on a lot of different issues, etc.?
Mm. Mm.
So, and it maps that onto the history of the United States.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. That was a really, really good overview of all that. And yeah, I hope that this conversation thus far has, you know, helped to clear some stuff up. Actually, I think if anything, it probably begs further questions.
Yeah, no, it really, really does.
you know.
Um,
Do you have any thoughts on what we can like take away from all of this? Like maybe your own like personal takeaways like from Settlers, things that you've learned from it that you think are useful, and maybe, well, yeah, the things that you think are useful. I mean, obviously, if you don't talk about it, we can probably discard it. But is there anything that you think is really useful that we can learn from this text and that people should maybe bring into our organizing?
Um, yeah, sure, definitely. So there is definitely a structural reason why the white working class is so much further right wing than, say, the black working class and the colonized working class, like in general. And it's not because of like some kind of biological essentialist, like white people are just like that kind of reason. It
Mm,
has nothing to do with skin color. We know that race, like as a biological category, isn't even real, basically. So it has to have its roots in history, which is something that all Marxists and leftists in general should be concerned about. Um, I think that it definitely speaks volumes, like the role of land, especially like throughout settler colonial society. I mean, back in the day, like I said earlier at the beginning of this chat, um, you could get a charter from the queen for 40 acres to a country that you've never even been to, and then you got there and you settled it, and that was like kind of the dream, right? These
mm,
days we have a small scale version of exactly that, because the American dream is to have like a house with a yard, which a lot of millennials are getting like more and more like that's just a pipe dream kind of situation.
mm.
But yeah, that's like a very small scale version of coming to a place that you didn't like. Yeah, small scale version of like settling. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words.
No, it's okay.
There are a lot of people who are very who like kind of like benefit from that kind of settler colonial history. I don't think that people should take from this that like, or at least I would disagree with the central claim that white people are not working class and have never been working class.
Mm.
Um, Proletariat asks, how exactly is the American white working class different from many others? It's further right wing for structural reasons um, that are historically constituted, and it's not because they're scientifically like exploited in a different way. It's like it is a settler colony, which a lot of people like to forget about in talking about the United States. So that is a society where one population of people wants to replace another. So there's going to be a very long history of eugenics. Um, would I say that the white working class is material better off today or during the settler era? Well, I mean, back during the settler era, they didn't have vaccinations, so I would probably say, I would probably say, no, that was that was a joke. I don't think that we should be looking at it that way. We shouldn't be looking at it as like, are white people better off today than they were before? We should be looking at the relationships between people. Um,
Mm.
and every American today benefits from, or every, yeah, pretty much every American today benefits from the genocide and settling of the indigenous people, benefits from slavery, like all of that stuff. And the legacy of all of those horrible things hasn't ever been removed. It's been like updated. Like instead of slavery, now we have mass incarceration, and instead of I guess genocide, like in the explicit like capital G kind of way, the government just chooses not to make infrastructure or running water on in like Native American settlements and stuff, or not settlements but reservations. Just refuses to make infrastructure there without like implementing neoliberal policies that, of course, the reservation government is going to oppose. And all of these things are historically constituted, and we have to consider that.
Mm. Mm. Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was a very thorough answer. And also, thanks for taking the question from the chat there from the Solitariat. That's a very, very useful question. There are, I mean, look, there are white people all over the world who aren't necessarily in the same position that white people would be in the United States for different
Yes.
material reasons. Ireland, is a good example of that as well. Especially if you look at like the native indigenous population in Ireland, the Catholics, the people who were the subjects of settler colonialism historically after plantations in the 1600s and so on and so forth. It's not a fair comparison. It's not like a one-to-one comparison. Obviously, with like what happened in America, it's really crazy what happened over there. But there definitely are some important distinctions to make there. This whole business about making this question of settler colonialism only entirely purely about race, I think, is maybe a little bit disingenuous as well. From certain people who do this, because settler colonialism has happened against people who are white, from white people to white people, as we see like English people doing this to Irish people as well. So this is and I feel like a dick even pointing this out, but I think it is kind of important to address. Settler colonialism is an issue in and of itself, and of course class and race are inextricably linked, and racialization very much is a part of that. But yeah, I would say that look at the situation in the north of Ireland as another example of it, and Sakai actually did mention that in the essay, the sort of postscript essay he wrote at the end of the book, which is useful. He does make this comparison between like ostensibly Catholics and Protestants in the north of Ireland, sort of positioning within that sort of settler colonizer and colonized relationship, and it's useful. It's useful to look at that as well. So, Comrade, is it okay with you if we answer a couple more questions before we finish this up, just from people in the chat? Does that sound okay with you?
Yeah, that sounds good. Also, I forgot another big takeaway that you should get from reading Settlers is that left-wing nationalism is based and cool and good.
Yes. Fucking yes. Yes, I very much agree. Actually, I'm interested in this question because someone asked actually about black separatism. Someone asked a question. Now, I don't know if this is like a disingenuous question or whatever like that, and maybe this even like the phrasing of it might be maybe problematic, but just I'd be interested. I'm going to pose it to you, and you can say fuck that if you want or not. But someone
Sure.
said. Kropotkin said, Paul, yeah, the name's Kropotkin. Paul Moran, thoughts on black separatism? Do you have any thoughts on this black separatism? I'm not sure if the phrasing of that is entirely, what people are
Right,
actually talking about, but
right.
it does. It sounds almost like slightly loaded in a strange way, but yeah, if we want to take kind of a very good faith reading of that, do you have any thoughts on? I know there was like this thing historically. I think the CPUSA talked about this, what like the black belt or something like that.
Yes.
Because obviously there was the Bolshevik line to support nations' right to self determination, and so communists historically would like supported that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the black belt was an idea thought of uh, somewhat after like the Reconstruction era. Basically, you had a very large population of black folks, many former slaves in like the southeast United States,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those former slave states were called the Black Belt. Like, and so the idea of self determination would be that like this whole place um, gets self determination in the form of basically some kind of a like the Black Panthers called it a plebiscite, which is like a big like vote, like a referendum to decide like whether or not the Black Belt wanted to be like a part of the United States. Obviously, America being as racist as it is, vehemently opposed like any mentioning of the Black Belt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Republic of New Africa, I think, wanted to do the same thing uh, in like the roughly like the same place. The Republic of New Africa being like I would probably call them like cultural nationalists. Like the Black Panthers were like Marxist nationalist kind of vibes, and
Mm-hmm.
so because of their Marxism, they were much more focused on the distribution of wealth and the you know being scientific about things.
Mm-hmm.
Where, if my understanding is correct, the Republic of New Africa was much more about spreading African culture and being like as African as you can. and their ambitions were very different, and often the Black Panthers and the Republic of New Africa like butted heads a couple of times because of that. So I guess what I mean here is that Black nationalism specifically is not a homogenous thing. Like there are lots of different kinds of Black nationalism, and a lot of the time they disagree with each other a whole bunch. So if there's any way to be more specific, talking about like a particular group, um, then I would be more than happy to like talk about that. But um, I think that any population of people who collectively decides that they want to have their own country or do their own thing, like, should be able to do that. Do I think that country for Black people being established would be like the ideal revolutionary scenario? Like, not exactly. I think that like a multinational society would be the most practical here because we live in a country of like a lot of different ethnicities, many of which are also colonized. And uh, I think that the idea of some gigantic scary like Black separatism, nationalism, left wing ethno state, like it's a made up idea. Like there's nobody really out here like arguing for that. Mostly there have been some groups in the past, some of which have been good, some of which have been bad. But like, I would really implore people to like stop using your gut reaction to ideas and like start thinking about it a lot more. Kwame Ture, I forgot what his exact quote was, but he said in politics a lot of the time we're just reacting to stimuli and thinking that we're thinking about it and giving like a thoughtful response, but really we're not. So try to avoid that if you can.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. That was really interesting, and I think it was a really interesting point that you highlighted that Black nationalism is not a monolith. There's so many different trends within Black nationalism. Some which would have been, as you said, more Marxist. Some which would have been like very far left. Some which would have been maybe there even would have been some which would have been more like right leaning, like pro-capitalist Black nationalisms. There's all kinds of nationalisms. You mentioned like cultural nationalism, things like that. There are people who would talk about different kinds of nationalism based on like ethnic nationalism versus civic nationalism, ethnic nationalism based on like ethnicity and all these sorts of stuff, and that can get into some of the really kind of sometimes troublesome stuff, especially if it's by like dominator people like white supremacy and all this sort of stuff. That's when things get really fucking troublesome. You get into like the blood and soil stuff, and that gets kind of fucked up. Then you've got of course like civic nationalism, which is more just based on pretty much basically if you have like if you have a piece of paper that says you're part of this country or this nation or whatever it might be, then that's basically you're part of it. If you want to be part of it, then grant you're part of it. But and of course there's like lots of different variations between them too, and sometimes strangely sometimes people will kind of take on some sort of ethno-nationalist positions, like even though, and it can be kind of presented in kind of left-wing language and rhetoric and stuff like that, and it can get kind of messy and confusing and kind of weird, and you don't really know what to make of it, and yeah, it can be a little bit confusing for everybody involved. Of course, this is a big issue with like Irish nationalism, with Black nationalism, and other forms of like potentially or hopefully progressive nationalisms all over the world. So yeah, it is interesting. I don't have a take. If anyone's looking for my take on Black separatism in the US and America and stuff like that, I don't have a take on that. It's not. I don't. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I think Simba did a great job explaining it. It's not. I don't really think it's my place to give a take on that. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, support.
Yeah, I think for people who want to try and understand what I would consider to be the revolutionary like Black nationalism, check out a book. It's called Black Against Empire. It's just about the history of the Black Panther Party, and that book changed my life. So check that one out if you want to understand like the revolutionary tradition within Black nationalism.
Really? Yeah, this question of nationalism, it's an interesting one. I find that mostly people on the lefts, when we talk about nationalism, progressive left nationalists, it's generally kind of like a practical nationalism rather than some sort of like sort of racial essentialist kind of thing, or something like that. It's generally just like a pragmatic thing.
Right.
Like, okay, we recognize that we're being oppressed based on this issue. Let's use that as a driving force to help get us to something better. And so it's a vehicle that gets you to socialism or to a more progressive society, or to overthrow this settler colonial state or whatever it might be. So the thing is with nationalism, it's generally not the end, it's the means to get to an end. And you should probably look at what the end is.
Right. Yeah,
It,
exactly.
is this just some reactionary ethno state? Are people trying to get you to use nationalism to like bring in like a monarchy or something, or is this actually to genuinely bring about like socialism? And so you can look at like Ho Chi Minh. You can look at like Vietnam and what happened there, and how they embraced nationalism. China as well. They definitely embraced progressive patriotism. Ireland, yeah, of course, and of course, most probably, I would say, of the strands of black nationalism as well, particularly in the US and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot there. It's kind of a nuanced conversation, which isn't
Yep.
often had, because it's usually just nationalism bad. that's
Yeah, seriously.
that's usually all you hear, and there's a lot more to it than that, I think. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, thank you very very much for that. Let's see, we'll take a couple more questions. Maybe we'll take two more questions if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Right, so Papi Chulo asked, does settlers only apply to the USA?
Settler colonialism exists on every continent, all over the place. So while the specific information, like here in this book, like is about the U.S., I would suspect, especially with a country that's so close with the United States, like Israel, you might be able to see some of the same um, sort of like settlerism phenomenon. Um, of course, like I personally am not like a super expert on like Israel or Australia or New Zealand or anything like that. But as long as like settler colonialism is a relevant force that is destroying people's lives, then like yeah, settlers is gonna be relevant, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, yeah, definitely agree with that. Thank you very very much, brilliant. And there's one more question, which I think is, well, almost like a kind of call to action kind of thing, which I think could be useful for a lot of people. Viv asks, um, Paul Young Simba, quick question, if it's cool. On a global scale, what do you think we should begin to do to reach socialism and materially tackle the consequences of colonialism? And also, Viv also said, just related to that, I spend a lot of time wondering how a white trans woman who is working class can literally directly begin to undo our current foundation of settler colonialism. So, what can people do? How can we actually fight back against this?
What can people do? That's so there's this a lot of people wonder like what is to be done, and fortunately there's a book called What Is to Be Done. So you could just take a peek at that. But no. For real
Based.
though, I think that you should make acknowledging left wing. Okay, so here it is. Acknowledging that left wing racism exists is very very important here in America.
Mm,
Um, like super important, and you have to make like giving the most disenfranchised people a voice in your organizing like a high priority. I used to sometimes say like if you want to know like what to think of an org, look at how they treat their black women or their black trans folks or their black this or that, just because
mm,
typically, as much as we like to pat ourselves on the back for being better than the right, a whole lot of bad stuff goes on that we don't slow down to try and think about, and a lot of the time it's because we weren't listening to the right people in a conversation or a meeting or a this or that. So definitely lend disenfranchised, especially colonized people in general, an ear, and give them ways to express their concerns about organizations. Definitely don't do what chat has been doing for a very long time today, and reacting without thinking to things,
Yep.
or rejecting this or that book
Yep.
based on just a few lines that you read, or an infographic, or a meme, or something like that. But yeah, we're socialists, so get out and socialize, or we're, communists, some of us, so like go out and talk to your community. You can't make it happen only on the internet. Of
Definitely.
course, being online um, can be a part of your praxis, but it should definitely not be a whole thing. Or if it's safe for you to, get out and talk to people. I know coronavirus is just
Yeah.
fucking everybody's day up, but
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's really important that there is a call to action, that we're actually, encouraging people to get it if at all possible. And I know, of course, coronavirus is impeding a lot of activism at the moment. But yeah, if you can, it would be really good. Get out into your community, get out into your unions. Inquire. Actually inquire if you can now. Like maybe let's try and be practical now. If you're starting from like base level, like this is the first kind of political work you're doing is watching videos on YouTube and you want to get involved, join your union. Find out what your union is. You can be a workers union if you're working. Then find out what your workers union is. Send a few emails around. Get involved there. If you're not working, then community union. Try and find out your community and tenants union. If you're in Ireland, I would recommend CATU, CATU. Have a little look of them, and we do a lot of organizing around community and tenants organizing. So all you need to do is you literally just need to be someone who is like renting a place, and then you can join. That's it. Renting, or I think they allow like homeowners who are paying mortgages as well. So if you're lucky enough to be in that position, then you'll probably be okay there as well. So get involved with community organizing, get involved with workplace organizing, and join a party. I would say, if you have a good idea of the ideology that you're interested in. If you're interested in like revolutionary socialist organizing, then get involved with a revolutionary socialist party, revolutionary socialist organization. Do a bit of research. Contact them. Just send them a few emails. Meet up with them. Maybe even it's just Zoom, like a Zoom call. Sit down, have a chat with them. You'll very quickly get a feel for the organizations when you're talking to the people. But yeah, like I would say, generally, just like joining a party is one of the most useful things that you can do. They will help you in your political growth. They will really help give you the trajectory that you need to move forwards. And they will, if they're a serious party, will be connected to the larger proletarian movement across the world. So you'll be thinking, you'll be acting locally, but you'll be thinking globally as well. So that's a practical thing that you can do. And even if you're not super active, even things like just like paying your dues to these, to the party, to the union, to all these things, like that really really helps. It helps them to create like little pamphlets and posters and do like advertising campaigns to get the message out there and to advance the projects forward, providing they're good, decent, useful organizations, which do a little bit of research and make sure that they are. But yeah, so just get involved in these things. So that's what I'd say: party, workers union, and tenants union. Get in contact with them, and yeah, they'll set you on the right track, and you should be good to go. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Simba, or what do you think?
um, no, actually, this conversation definitely awesome. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Oh, thank you
Just
for coming
a
on.
lot of lots of stuff to think about, and
Yeah.
lots of yeah. I actually feel like I'm slightly more confused about class analysis now than I was like at the beginning.
Me too.
Or specifically Jay Sakai's perspective on class analysis.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Me
yeah,
too. Big
thanks for
in a big way. In a big way. That the first chapter, that quote you pulled out, really threw me. I was just like, oh shit. I've been telling people for like months, like, nah, he doesn't. He's not saying they're not proletarian. He's literally saying that they're part of the proletariat. They're just part of labor aristocracy. And you pull out that quote, and I'm just like,
that.
oh fuck.
Right.
Oh no, I'm wrong.
Yeah,
But then yeah, so there's like this contradiction within the book, I suppose, in the popular sense of the term, I suppose. So yeah, it's a
yeah.
weird one.
Sometimes you got to reread a book to really understand it, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot to think about anyway. Listen, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Do you want to like shout out anyone? Do you want to discuss any like upcoming works? Tell people where they can find you. Now's your chance to shout something from the rooftops. Any messages you have for the good people, aside from telling them not to be such argumentative dickheads in the
Yeah,
chat.
okay. Stop being argumentative dickheads. Stop watching Debate Bros.
Yes.
I'm young
Oh,
Simba.
we didn't talk about the debate bros.
We didn't. We didn't. We should have.
Yeah,
Maybe another time.
maybe another time. There's probably enough vitriol in the chat already. Maybe we don't need to fan the flames.
Absolutely not. I don't want a million, Vosh fans in your DMs or whatever.
I
But
definitely don't want a million Vosh fans in my DMs.
yeah, but as soon as I build my new PC, I'm gonna get on making videos specifically about the Black Panther Party, but I'm sure a number of other topics. I think link is in the description.
Yep.
I would like to shout out the Red Nation podcast, which is great. They're doing great work. They're Native American Marxists who got together. They have like a podcast where they talk about all kinds of global and domestic issues. Host of that is Nick Estes. He wrote, I think it was called "Our History Is Our Future." But if anybody is an expert on settler colonialism, it's them. So check that out.
Brilliant.
Settlers, also Black Against Empire. Those are all good. So there's some other content for you. And yeah, thanks for being here, inviting me on here.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. I'm just going to do a quick shout out to the people in the chat there as well. Just a couple of names, some familiar faces, the ones who I haven't seen getting up to any trouble. I'm going to say thank you very much to the people in the chat there. Cosmic Bread, Alana Montero, Tank Punk, Ben Totes, The Partisan, Viv Colette, Dyrus Gray, and Pappy Chulo. And Tank Punk. Thank you very much, 00 Mongoose. I really appreciate you guys sticking around. It's very, very kind of you to be here. We'll be back next Wednesday. We're going to be talking about Welsh national liberation, the national liberation struggle in Wales. That's going to be quite interesting. We've got Galilean Carpenters Union coming on to discuss that a little bit. And then next Saturday, we're going to be talking a little bit about the communists in the Philippines, the NPA, the CPP, and their protracted People's War and their revolutionary struggle that's ongoing at the moment. So thank you very much, comrades. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Young Simba, thank you again for coming on. This has been edifying and educational, and there's lots and lots to think about. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I wish you all the best, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, comrades. I can never figure out how to say goodbye at the end of these streams. Simba, do you have like any like a catchphrase or or something to finish up on?
Catchphrase?
Like like one of when Connor Gillis came on, they would say solidarity, comrades. That was like a really good ending. But that's
a good way to sign off.
Yeah.
Yeah, for my videos, what do I say? I say like, hit like if you like, click subscribe to join the pride, ding that bell, and I wish you well.
Oh,
so there you go.
Amazing. Can't do better than that. Thank you, everybody. Take care.